A black veteran and his retired K9 partner walked into an airport. What happened next exposed a system built on quiet injustice. Pulled aside for no clear reason, Malik watched as his loyal dog growled not at him, but at the very officer who'd singled him out. What Ranger uncovered changed everything, forcing a national investigation, clearing Malik's name, and rewriting federal policy. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's about truth, loyalty, and what happens when someone finally listens. If stories like this matter to you, like this video, subscribe and stick around because the truth deserves to be heard. It had been 3 years since Malik Johnson last set foot on American soil, not counting the brief, sterile reentries during deployments. But this time was different. This was final. No orders waiting, no camouflage bags at his feet, no stern briefing before a flight out. Just a man and his dog coming home. The terminal at JFK buzzed with the usual rhythm of rushing footsteps, rolling suitcases, and muffled announcements over the intercom. But for Malik, the noise faded into the background. He walked with steady purpose. Ranger, trotting closely at his side, harnessed but relaxed his intelligent eyes, scanning everything. Most travelers gave them a wide berth, not out of fear, but something closer to reverence. A tall, broad-shouldered black man in a worn military jacket, boots, scuffed, and eyes focused, accompanied by a German shepherd that moved like he still believed he was on duty. It was a striking image. Ranger was more than just a dog. He was Malik's brother-in-arms, his partner during the long nights in Kandahar and tense mornings in Baghdad. After a roadside bomb cost 2 of their unit their lives, it was Ranger who dragged Malik from the debris and stood watch until the medics arrived. Ranger, too, had earned his scars. A faded line across his flank. A slight limp on cold mornings. But he had been lucky discharged instead of put down, and now they were both adjusting to something new peace. As they reached the TSA checkpoint, Malik removed his backpack and stepped forward, offering his ID and boarding pass. The agent, a stocky man with tired eyes and a tight expression, gave them both a long look. "Step aside, sir," he said, his tone flat but firm. "Secondary screening." Malik blinked. "Everything all right?" he asked calmly. "Just standard procedure," the agent replied, already motioning to another officer. But Malik had flown twice since returning home for medical consults, and never once had he been flagged for extra screening. His hands stayed steady as he removed Ranger's service papers from his jacket pocket. "This is my discharge companion. Fully registered non-active K9 cleared for domestic travel." The second officer barely glanced at the documents. "Still need to check the bags." The secondary screening room was colder, more clinical. Malik watched in silence as his belongings were unpacked piece by piece. His books a folder of VA documents, protein bars, Ranger's meds. Nothing suspicious. Ranger sat patiently watching the TSA agents with an alert stillness. But Malik's eyes noticed something else. The glances between the two agents. The way they lingered on his uniform patches longer than necessary. One even turned over Ranger's water bowl twice as if expecting contraband beneath it. "What are you expecting to find?" Malik finally asked, his tone polite but edged. The first agent didn't answer. The second gave a quick shrug. "You understand. High alert today." Ranger let out a soft, low huff, barely audible. Malik placed a steady hand on the dog's back, a silent reassurance more for himself than the animal. They'd been through worse. But something about this, the lack of explanation, the sudden change in behavior, didn't sit right. Outside the glass wall, passengers filed through the regular checkpoint unaware. Malik sat down, his ordered eyes following every movement. He wasn't angry yet, but he was listening. Ranger's ears flicked forward again, sensing the shift in air pressure, or maybe just the tone in Malik's breathing. A younger agent entered the room briefly, whispering something to the first officer before casting a quick glance toward Malik. The officer nodded but said nothing. That glance, that damn glance, Malik had seen it too many times overseas when a plan went sideways, when someone knew something you didn't. He straightened up. "Is there a problem with my record?" he asked. "Any alerts?" "Nothing flagged," came the reply, but it lacked weight. After another 15 minutes, they were let go. No apologies, no reasons given. Just a muttered, "You're clear," and a gesture toward the exit. Malik reassembled his pack in silence, clipped Ranger's leash back into place, and walked out without another word. But something stayed with him, not just the unnecessary scrutiny, but the feeling. Like the war had followed him home, slipped past the gates of the base and onto the smooth airport tiles. He'd expected reintegration to be complicated, but not this. Back at his gate, a few people watched him pass. One man nodded respectfully, another averted their gaze. Malik didn't care. Ranger pressed gently against his thigh, sensing the tension still present in his muscles. "We're good, buddy," Malik murmured. "Just keep moving forward." And they did, toward the gate, toward the next chapter. Neither of them knowing that this incident was not an isolated one, but the spark to something bigger. The boarding area smelled faintly of cinnamon pretzels and overwaxed tile, an oddly sterile comfort that Malik barely noticed. He had just settled into a seat near Gate 32, with Ranger lying neatly at his feet, head down but ears alert. People moved around them, and the fluid rhythm of airport's glances cast their way a few steps slower than usual, when passing a few children pointing before their parents gently pulled them along. It was a familiar choreography, and Malik had grown used to being seen but not approached. Ranger, too, remained composed, his body language neutral, his breath even. Then the rhythm broke. It started with a tone shift, a voice on a radio clipped and hurried, followed by the sudden appearance of another TSA officer approaching from the left. He was younger than the ones from the screening room, with a buzz cut and a firm jaw, the kind of posture that tried too hard. Malik didn't move, just watched as the man closed the distance with a measured pace, eyes trained not on him, but on Ranger. "Excuse me, sir," the officer began, voice too casual, too rehearsed. "Mind if I ask you a few more questions?" Malik stood slowly, sensing the energy around him shift like a drop in barometric pressure. "You already ran my documents," he replied, keeping his voice level. "Everything was cleared 20 minutes ago." The officer didn't respond to that. His gaze dropped again to Ranger, who was now standing between Malik and the TSA agent. What happened next was so subtle that only someone trained would have caught it, the change in Ranger's posture. Not aggressive, but firm. His tail straightened, his shoulders squared, and a low-controlled growl rose from his chest. It stopped the officer in his tracks. The growl was nothing like a bark or snarl. It was the sound of a K9 trained to warn before reacting a vibration from deep in the belly that said, "This is not a drill." Malik's hand went instinctively to Ranger's harness. "Easy," he murmured. "Stay." But Ranger didn't break his stare. The TSA agent took half a step back. "Is that dog fully under your control?" Malik's jaw tightened. "He's more disciplined than most humans I know. He doesn't growl unless he has a reason." Around them, the subtle hum of the terminal had quieted. Conversation slowed. A few passengers nearby had turned their heads, sensing tension before understanding it. A teenage girl 2 rows over raised her phone halfway, then lowered it, then raised it again. "Sir," the TSA agent said again, his voice rising just enough to carry, "I'm going to ask you to calm your dog, or we'll need to." "He is calm," Malik interrupted. "Still steady. You're the one escalating." The girl with the phone was filming now. So was someone else across the hall. From behind the counter, a flight attendant whispered something into a phone. Ranger's growl subsided slightly, but his body remained firm, eyes locked on the TSA agent, who finally broke eye contact and took a full step back. And just like that, the moment should have ended. But it didn't. A man in a denim jacket sitting nearby muttered loud enough to be heard, "Jesus, he's just sitting there." If he were white, they'd be offering him a coffee. The comment wasn't meant to spark anything. It was just one of those tired truths spoken too loudly in public. But the girl with the phone caught it. Her camera pivoted, caught the TSA badge, caught Ranger's poised stance, and Malik's face calm, collected, tired. Then her voice soft but clear. "You see that? Dog knows better than half these guys. Bet this is some profiling crap." The video ended there, but it didn't end online. Within minutes, she had uploaded it with a caption, "K9 protects black veteran from TSA overreach. This ain't right." It didn't take long to spread. Back at Gate 32, Malik finally sat back down, releasing Ranger's harness, but not the tension in his shoulders. The TSA officer had walked away after a brief radio exchange and a glare that lingered too long. No apology. No explanation. Ranger settled at his feet again, but this time his body didn't relax. His ears remained upright, his breath tight. Malik reached down and brushed his hand across the dog's thick fur. "You felt something," he said under his breath. "I know that growl. You don't do it unless there's something real." People walked by slower now. A few looked directly at him, eyes wide with unspoken thoughts. Sympathy, curiosity, he couldn't tell. What he did know was that something about that encounter didn't sit right. Not just the growl, but the way that second agent had approached, like he already had a conclusion in mind. Like he had come not to ask questions but to confirm a suspicion. Malik leaned back in his seat, gaze tracking the ceiling lights as he tried to push the unease aside. But Ranger remained alert, and Malik trusted that more than anything. He didn't yet know about the video. Didn't know it was being shared in real time, already passed from hand to hand, phone to phone. Didn't know a young man in Atlanta with 20,000 followers had just retweeted it with the words, "Even a damn military dog can smell racism. Watch this." Didn't know a civil rights lawyer in D.C. had saved the clip to her phone and begun typing an email to a contact at TSA headquarters. What Malik did know, however, was this: the war may have ended overseas, but something else had started here quietly beneath the surface, and Ranger had been the first to sense it. His instincts, honed through explosions, threats, and survival, had picked up something the human eye hadn't. Not yet, not entirely. The call came just as Malik was rising to check the gate status screen. A short, clipped voice over the intercom called his name, asked him to report to TSA Desk 4. At first, he thought maybe it was about his checked luggage or a flight delay. But as he approached the counter, he noticed the same TSA officer from earlier standing stiffly beside another man in uniform. This one, older, broader, with a security badge and the unmistakable posture of airport police. "Mr. Malik Johnson," the officer confirmed, not waiting for Malik's response before gesturing toward a hallway to the left. "We need a few more minutes of your time." Malik stared at him. "For what I've already been through 2 checks. I've got a boarding pass, cleared baggage, and this dog has federal registration." The officer didn't respond, just gave that silent institutional nod people in power often use when they know you're out of options. Ranger stood at Malik's left side, calm but alert, his paws planted, eyes scanning again. They led him through a gray security door into a secondary room far from the public eye. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow on the scratched linoleum floor. A metal table stood in the center, 2 folding chairs on either side, and a camera affixed high in the corner, red light blinking. Malik had seen rooms like this before in forward operating bases and interrogations, in moments where the truth felt optional. "This room's not standard," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The older officer didn't answer, just gestured to the chair. Malik remained standing. Ranger didn't move. Then came the second insult. A third man entered wearing the navy blue of airport law enforcement. He looked Malik over quickly, then dropped his gaze to Ranger. "That your animal?" he asked, voice louder than necessary. Malik didn't respond right away, waiting to see where the question would land. The officer continued. "Is that a trained attack dog, military grade? Do we need to call someone in to restrain it?" The air in the room thickened. Malik blinked once slowly. He'd been asked many things in his career by generals, by foreign allies, by civilians terrified of what they didn't understand. But never this. Never if his dog, his partner, his lifeline needed to be restrained like a weapon. "He's not an it," Malik said flatly. "His name is Ranger, and he's calmer than any of you in this room." The officer smirked. "Look, sir, we've had reports of what Malik cut in. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried. That my dog growled when someone got too close, that he didn't like how he was being looked at, no answer." Ranger didn't move, but Malik could feel the tension in his leash, not from aggression but from restraint. The dog was reading the room better than the people in it. The younger TSA agent leaned over to whisper something to the police officer. Malik watched their mouths move, watched the flicker of eyes the way they avoided looking directly at him. Then the door opened again, and another figure stepped in, a woman this time wearing a slim black blazer with a DHS lanyard hanging from her neck. Her tone was even practiced. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "we apologize for the inconvenience, but a video involving your interaction with TSA has circulated online. It's gaining attention. We're conducting a standard follow-up." Malik stared at her. "So now social media decides airport protocol." She didn't flinch. "We're simply being thorough." "Where's your probable cause?" he asked, taking a step forward. "What part of my record flagged you for this room?" Again, no answer. The police officer shifted uncomfortably. The woman looked at her tablet, tapped a few times, then looked back up. "We'd like your cooperation, that's all." Malik sat finally not out of surrender but control. Ranger laid down beside him, chin resting on his paws, but his eyes never left the officer who had questioned him. The camera light in the corner blinked red, recording everything. Malik clasped his hands. "You people really don't understand," he said, voice quiet but direct. "You see a black man in boots with a military dog and you assume threat." The woman hesitated. "That's not—" "It is," he said. "You wouldn't have pulled a white veteran with a golden retriever, but a German shepherd and a black man in fatigues. Suddenly, we're suspicious." She looked away. The officers didn't respond. Outside that room, the terminal buzzed on. People boarded planes, lattes were poured, announcements echoed, and somewhere a video of Ranger growling protectively beside his handler had surpassed 200,000 views. Back in the interrogation room, Malik watched the silence hang in the air like smoke. "I served your country," he added finally. "More than once. My dog has more field time than half your agents. You pulled us in here not because of danger, but because of discomfort." Still no reply. The air felt colder than before. The woman turned to one of the agents. "Review the footage again," she said. "From the last checkpoint, too. Let's be sure before we proceed." Malik tilted his head just slightly. Proceed with what the woman didn't answer. And Ranger, still lying low, began to let out another growl, deeper this time. Malik didn't stop him. He knew exactly what that sound meant. The growl deepened, and though Malik didn't move, his entire body tightened. Ranger's instincts never fired without cause. Malik had trusted them through sandstorms, roadside raids, and night patrols in the dead zones of Kandahar. In this sterile airport room, under buzzing fluorescent lights, and behind a table that still smelled faintly of antiseptic, that same instinct was flaring. The TSA officer nearest to Ranger took a half-step back. "Control your dog," he barked, hand-brushing near his belt like Ranger's presence alone was a threat. Malik didn't blink. "He's trying to tell you something. Maybe you should stop and listen." The woman in the black blazer looked up from her tablet, frowning. Is the animal signaling something specific? Malik didn't answer. Ranger was already moving. Without warning, the dog pivoted, eyes locked not on a person, but on a black nylon backpack slouched in the corner of the room, tucked under the table behind a stack of extra gloves and TSA forms. It hadn't been there when Malik entered. No one had mentioned it. And yet Ranger's focus was laser-sharp. He crouched, low tail, rigid nose, twitching as he approached. Back one of the officers shouted, "Get him away from that!" But Ranger didn't respond. With a sudden lunge, he launched himself at the bag, claws scraping the linoleum, his nose burying deep into the side pocket. Then, unmistakably, he barked. Sharp. Twice. Malik stood. His chair screeched back across the floor. "That's a narcotics alert," he said quietly. "You know that sound. That's how he was trained." Officers looked at each other, suddenly less sure. The woman in the blazer stepped forward, brow furrowing. "Is that your bag?" she asked Malik. "No," Malik said firmly. "I've never seen it before." The TSA officer from earlier, the one with the tight expression and dismissive tone, suddenly looked very pale. He stepped between Malik and the dog. "We don't know what the dog's reacting to. Could be residual scent." "No," Malik replied, his voice low and clear. "Ranger doesn't false flag. Not after this many years." Another bark, louder. Ranger's paw began to scratch at the zipper. "Step away," the older airport cop snapped, pulling on gloves. He yanked the bag toward himself, ignoring Malik entirely, and placed it on the metal table. "Let's just see what's inside." Malik crossed his arms, watching closely. The officer unzipped the main compartment. Silence stretched long. Then he pulled out a thick black pouch, the kind used for personal hygiene or tools. He opened it. Inside, vacuum-sealed bricks wrapped in brown plastic. No one spoke. The woman leaned forward. "That's not marijuana," she said after a second. "That's heroin." The older officer snapped on a second glove, lifting the pouch slightly. "At least a couple kilos. Street grade." A sudden silence gripped the room like all oxygen had been sucked out. The TSA officer who had first pulled Malik aside was suddenly red in the face, but not with anger. His eyes darted around the room. The woman in black turned to Malik. "I need to ask again," she said carefully. "You didn't bring this bag." Malik's jaw tightened. "Do I look stupid enough to smuggle heroin with a certified detection dog at my side?" She flinched, just slightly. Then, from the far corner, a voice spoke up, one no one had paid much attention to until now. "I saw him," the voice said. Everyone turned. It was a young woman, early 30s, TSA support staff based on her ID badge. She'd been standing near the back with a clipboard taking notes, logistics, personnel shifts, intake documentation. "I was bringing extra gloves," she continued. 10 minutes before the dog entered the room. That bag wasn't here. The older officer frowned. "You sure I'm positive?" "I stacked the gloves exactly where it's sitting. It wasn't there. I remember because the corner was clear." A pause. She looked over at the TSA agent, the first one. "But I did see him come back in alone. Said he left his water bottle. He was in here for a minute, maybe less." The agent's face drained of color. "I didn't put that there," he stammered. "That bag's not mine." Malik's expression didn't change, but Ranger's body stiffened again as if sensing something unsaid. "You're saying a TSA officer entered this room alone without documentation before a high-profile secondary screening," the woman in the blazer said slowly. "And now there's narcotics in an unclaimed bag." The room fell deadly silent. The older officer rubbed his temples. "Jesus." The younger agent backed away from the table. "I want a union rep, right now." The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Malik. This just became something else entirely. She reached for her radio. "I need 2 internal affairs investigators in screening room 4 immediately, and call the port director." Ranger sat tail-tapping once, gaze locked on the bag. Malik exhaled slowly. Not because he was relieved, but because something about the whole setup had just shifted. And it wasn't over. Within 10 minutes of the narcotics discovery, the small interview room transformed into a makeshift command post. The woman from DHS, whose badge now read Agent Reyes, had summoned 2 internal investigators, both dressed in dark suits, their demeanor already sharpened by the magnitude of what had just been found. Malik stood against the wall, arms crossed, Ranger seated beside him with military stillness. The room's energy had changed entirely. Where earlier there had been suspicion and subtle intimidation, now there was uncertainty, a hesitancy in every movement, as if everyone present realized they might be standing in the middle of something far larger than a customs flag or traveler mistake. Agent Reyes gestured toward the mounted camera in the upper corner. "Can we get playback from 15 minutes before Mr. Johnson entered the room?" she asked the uniformed tech who had arrived with a tablet and a portable screen. "And isolate the hallway outside, too. I want a full loop from that checkpoint forward." The tech nodded, fingers already swiping across the screen. "Pulling footage from Corridor A to an internal room 4, he said. Time index syncing." The screen filled with pixelated footage from a slightly angled overhead view. The timestamp blinked 12:41 p.m. They watched in silence as the door opened. The same TSA agent, the one who had led Malik in and first suggested the secondary screening, stepped into the room alone. He held a phone in one hand, glanced quickly toward the camera, then moved across the space to the far wall where a supply bin stood. He bent slightly, then rose, a black nylon bag now in his hand. He moved without hesitation to the corner by the glove boxes and gently set it down. Then he left. No water bottle, no hesitation. Just a man placing something where it didn't belong. The room remained silent for a second. Then the older of the two investigators, a man named Lambert, spoke. "That's enough to initiate a misconduct inquiry and suspend clearance," he said, effective immediately. Agent Reyes didn't blink. "Suspend nothing," she said. "We're escalating this to federal coordination. That's a placement of contraband in a screening room tied to an active traveler. This is beyond internal policy." The officer who had earlier threatened to restrain Ranger looked visibly stunned now. "You think he planted it?" Malik spoke before anyone else could answer. "Your dog already told you that?" All eyes turned to Ranger, who remained still, save for his eyes locked on the now visibly sweating TSA officer standing in the corner who had refused to sit since the moment the video started. Ranger's ears were forward, not aggressive, but focused. His tail was flat. His stance said everything. Reyes turned to Malik. "You said earlier he doesn't alert unless he's certain. How does he react around someone carrying versus someone who just came into contact?" Malik kept his tone measured. "If there's transfer scent like someone just handled something contaminated, he sniffs, maybe tilts his head. Curious, not alarmed. But when he gives that low warning growl, it's because the source is live. He knows the difference between residual and current threat." As if on cue, Ranger let out that same low vibration. Quiet even, but unmistakable. His body shifted slightly toward the TSA officer, who instinctively stepped back. "You need to get that dog away from me," the officer said quickly. "No," Reyes replied, eyes narrowing. "I want him exactly where he is." Lambert pulled a small notepad from his coat. "You entered the screening room without documentation," he said to the officer, "and left behind a bag now confirmed to contain narcotics." "Do you deny that's you in the video?" the man stammered. I was moving confiscated items. That bag was supposed to be logged later. It's protocol sometimes to leave things no." The tech interrupted quietly, not looking up. "That bag doesn't match any seizure log from today. Or yesterday. I just checked." Reyes stepped forward. "You planted it. And you knew the room would be used for Mr. Johnson's secondary screen. You put a bag of heroin into a secure area adjacent to a former military dog trained to detect that exact substance. Either you're an idiot, or you thought the narrative would be stronger if a dangerous animal triggered it." The TSA officer's composure fractured completely. "I didn't mean he wasn't supposed to go for it. It was just a scare tactic. To delay. Just to rattle him." "To rattle him," Malik repeated slowly. "You brought narcotics into a secure federal checkpoint to rattle a veteran." And his service dog silence again. Reyes turned to the tech. "Save that feed, all of it. We'll need to submit it to the DOJ. And get the footage from the screening line, too. I want everything." Then slowly she turned back to Ranger. "Did he react to anyone else today?" Malik hesitated. "Just him," he said finally. "From the moment we crossed through security." Ranger tensed. Not a full growl, just a shift, but that's how it starts with him. I've seen it in the field. He tracks threat long before it's visible." Reyes nodded. "Which means this may not be isolated." She turned back to Lambert. "We may be looking at broader manipulation. If this officer placed one bag, how many others might have been misdirected?" Ranger's growl cut through the pause again, louder this time. The TSA officer stepped fully behind one of the investigators, now his face-pale shoulders hunched. Ranger did not move from his spot. His body said everything. By the time the second set of investigators arrived to formally take the TSA officer into custody, the video had already passed 3.2 million views. What started as a shaky 30-second clip filmed by a teenage girl waiting for a flight to Dallas had evolved into a national moment complete with hashtags, dueling commentaries, late-night satire segments, and a rapidly intensifying firestorm aimed squarely at the Transportation Security Administration. The caption, "Even the dog knows who the real criminal is," had been retweeted by a retired Marine general quoted in a think piece from The Atlantic and plastered across morning news panels where anchors could barely conceal their disbelief. The footage wasn't just viral. It was damning. It showed Ranger calm, calculated, trained alerting with textbook precision to the very man who had moments earlier tried to accuse his handler of smuggling. No one could argue with the dog. He wasn't political, he wasn't emotional, he didn't have an agenda, he had instincts. And those instincts had done what multiple layers of bureaucracy and oversight had failed to do: identify a corrupt actor, expose a false flag, and protect an innocent veteran from systemic humiliation. Within 24 hours, TSA's Public Relations Division had been reduced to crisis management mode. Press statements were issued, then retracted, then revised. A review task force was announced by noon the following day, and all personnel connected to JFK's Gate 32 operations were placed under administrative reassignment pending further inquiry. But it wasn't just TSA. Calls had started coming in from congressional offices. Journalists began pulling documents finding whistleblower complaints from years prior buried under incomplete evidence tags. Veterans advocacy groups demanded an apology, citing racial profiling, psychological harm, and the misuse of national security protocols for intimidation tactics. And then the Pentagon stepped in. A formal memo issued by the Undersecretary of Defense requested full access to all security screening logs and personnel files tied to the incident. The memo, signed within hours of review, cited the potential compromise of a high-level military K9 handler team, as well as broader implications for interagency trust during travel. Though it didn't name Malik specifically, the wording left no room for doubt. Someone had mishandled a situation involving a decorated veteran, and the Department of Defense wanted answers. Malik, meanwhile, had returned to his apartment in Queens by the time the story reached its fever pitch. He hadn't slept. The adrenaline had worn off, but something deeper anger mixed with a quiet, wounded disbelief remained beneath his skin. Ranger had curled up at the foot of his bed, eyes flicking open every time Malik shifted. He sensed the unrest. The knock on the door came just before 9 a.m. It wasn't law enforcement. It was a woman in a gray suit with a black folder bearing the DHS insignia and an envelope sealed in blue wax. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I've been asked to speak with you directly. This is no longer just an incident. It's an inquiry, and we believe you can help." Malik didn't answer right away. He let her in, offered her water, let Ranger sniff her hand. Then he opened the envelope. Inside was a formal request: Pentagon Advisory Liaison, temporary clearance, consulting role, scope, procedural integrity, K9 behavioral insight, and counter-bias audit. "You want me to help clean it up?" Malik asked, tone flat. "We want you to tell us what we missed," she replied. "You and that dog just exposed something we haven't been able to trace for years. That matters." Malik looked at Ranger, who was now sitting beside the couch, eyes fixed on the woman like he understood everything. "You realize he's not just a tool," Malik said. "He's a partner. You don't bring us in just to check boxes." The woman nodded. "We understand that. That's why we're not giving you a script. We're giving you access." The next 48 hours moved faster than anything Malik had experienced since active deployment. He was flown to D.C. on a private security jet, met at the tarmac by a small team from a joint oversight committee, and taken to a secure facility just outside Arlington. There, he was briefed not on policies but on patterns. The woman from before Reyes met him again in a conference room with a single wall-sized screen showing heat maps of airport disciplinary actions, complaint clusters, and internal investigations marked inconclusive. "We think this goes back at least 6 years," she said, pointing to one cluster in Miami. "Same profile every time. Young men flagged for secondary screening, most of them veterans, most of them Black or Latino. Inconclusive findings, lost paperwork, and then you walk in with a dog who doesn't play politics and suddenly the system chokes." Malik stared at the data. "You want me to find out who else buried things?" Reyes shook her head. "No. We want you to help us build something that doesn't need burying in the first place." And so he began, reviewing footage, cross-referencing alert logs with K9 training benchmarks, sitting in on meetings with TSA leadership where silence often followed his every word. Because Malik didn't shout, he didn't accuse, he simply described. He described the way a dog reacts when someone's lying. He described the tone in an officer's voice that comes not from protocol but prejudice. He described what it's like to serve your country overseas only to come home and be treated like a suspect on your own soil, and people listened. Not because he demanded it, but because he and Ranger had already done what no investigation had managed before. They made people watch, and this time they couldn't look away. The third day of Malik's consultancy began with an unmarked brown folder slid across a glass table thicker than most of the case files he'd reviewed so far, sealed, not with a DHS stamp, but with a dull red sticker marked Archived Internal. He recognized the formatting immediately, the kind of folder not meant to be seen again, unless someone asked with the right combination of access persistence and political cover. Agent Reyes was the one who slid it to him, her face unreadable, her voice calm. "We traced the background of the TSA officer who planted the narcotics," she said. "Turns out this wasn't his first incident, just the first one that stuck." Malik opened the folder, the pages heavy with copied memos, email exchanges, and typed testimonies. One stood out early, a discrimination complaint filed 2 years prior by a traveler flagged at the Miami terminal citing unwarranted secondary screening, disparaging racial remarks, and hostile behavior. The document was dated, signed, and stamped with a large red word, unsubstantiated. But what caught Malik's attention was a name scrawled in pen in the margin, another TSA supervisor, someone who had reviewed and closed the file within hours of it being submitted. He flipped to the next incident, then another. 2 more allegations, one involving a female Marine corporal whose belongings were lost after a random security alert, another involving a veteran of Middle Eastern descent accused of faking his service credentials. All closed, all unsubstantiated. But the language in the memos was familiar. Phrases like perceived attitude, behavioral red flags, security discretion exercised all code words Malik had learned to recognize as smokescreens for bias dressed in protocol. Reyes leaned forward, arms folded. Internal Affairs never flagged him because they only saw what was in front of them. His numbers looked clean, he followed just enough procedure to hide the pattern. But you and Ranger forced the footage, and now the context makes everything clearer. Malik didn't look up. He turned another page. There it was again, another complaint, another dismissal, but this one with a handwritten note attached to Post-it yellowed with age. He's aggressive but useful. Knows how to read passengers. Useful. Malik exhaled slowly, then pushed the file aside. Reyes didn't need to explain further. The man had been protected not by a conspiracy, but by the slow rot of institutional comfort, the habit of keeping familiar problems just buried enough to avoid accountability. Then, unexpectedly, another folder appeared, thinner, newer. This one, Reyes opened herself. "We ran a parallel," she said. "Since everyone keeps talking about how sharp your dog is, we decided to look at his file, too. Most of it was standard high marks in all areas, clean discharge. But then this." She turned the file so Malik could read. It was a mission report dated 6 years ago, stamped Kandahar Operation Tide Lock. Malik's pulse shifted. Ranger's name was highlighted 3 times in the first paragraph. During a sweep sequence, the report read K9 Unit Ranger signaled explosive detection near forward Humvee. Malik remembered that day. The dog's signal had come so sharply, so suddenly, that Malik had tackled 2 fellow soldiers to the ground without explanation. Moments later, a concealed IED was found under the wheel well, military-grade pressure-triggered, meant to detonate as they drove into the checkpoint. The final count 5 lives, saved 1 bomb, neutralized no injuries. Ranger's behavior had been noted as exceptional, possibly precognitive. But that wasn't the most interesting entry. Further down, another record appeared. During post-op transport, it read K9 Ranger Bit fellow soldier attempting to bypass inspection protocol. That soldier had been a logistics tech, someone with high-level clearance, later dishonorably discharged after a separate investigation, found multiple contraband items in his supply runs pills, cartridges, small arms components. He'd claimed the dog was faulty unstable, but after review the behavioral team had cleared Ranger completely. He hadn't just alerted, he'd exposed. Malik leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "That was the only person he ever bit," he said quietly. I never reported it as significant. We were told it was under control. Reyes nodded. That's because it got buried fast. But now it's relevant. You have a dog who's never shown unwarranted aggression, never once false alerted, but both times he reacted that way, once overseas, once at JFK, it was tied to concealed contraband handled by Americans abusing authority. Malik glanced down at Ranger, who sat calmly beneath the table, ears forward, watching Reyes. He remembers, Malik said. That sent that pattern. That TSA guy moved like the one in Kandahar. Same rhythm, same wrong energy. Reyes didn't argue. She simply opened her laptop, tapped a few keys, and pulled up another name. That logistics tech from Kandahar, she said. He's stateside now. Guess where he was stationed last year? Malik said nothing. Reyes turned the screen toward him. The words blinked at the top of the personnel record, TSA, JFK, Contract Support Specialist, 2022. Malik's jaw tensed. A flash of memory returned a face from years ago, now blurred by time but somehow still familiar. Not the same agent, but connected. And Ranger, for the second time in his life, had sounded the alarm. 3 weeks after the incident at JFK, a formal hearing was convened at a federal administrative facility in Northern Virginia. A sterile conference hall converted into a tribunal room with panel seating on one side and a modest audience gallery facing the front. The Department of Homeland Security had appointed a civilian oversight committee to preside, composed of 3 members, an ethics officer, a behavioral specialist, and a retired military judge with 26 years on the bench. Malik entered the room in civilian dress, his posture straight but his expression unreadable. Ranger walked at his side, leashed but calm, his coat brushed to a near gloss under the hall's cold lighting. The dog's presence had been cleared under service animal protocol, but still whispers rose in the gallery as they passed some curious others, skeptical, a few quietly reverent. Agent Reyes was already seated at the government table, flanked by 2 case managers and a representative from the Office of the Inspector General. The TSA officer, James C. Millen, sat across the room behind his private counsel, a sleek-suited man named Derek Linth, who had made his reputation defending federal employees in high-profile disciplinary cases. The stakes were clear. Either Malik would be publicly cleared of all wrongdoing and used as an example of procedural reform, or he would face a drawn-out legal battle that could stain his name and effectively end any further involvement in federal reform efforts. The hearing opened with a review of the surveillance footage, a clear timeline laid out by Reyes, showing Millen entering the screening room alone, planting the untagged black bag, and exiting without protocol documentation. It showed Malik and Ranger entering moments later, Ranger alerting to the bag, and the subsequent discovery of narcotics. It showed Millen's response, his attempt to redirect blame, and the beginning of the internal unraveling. But then Linth stood. Members of the committee, he began, while the government claims my client acted inappropriately, there exists no definitive proof that the contraband was deliberately planted by him. Additionally, I intend to present compelling evidence that Mr. Malik Johnson, while a decorated veteran, may have engaged in reckless handling of a potentially aggressive animal. This includes prior mission reports of canine violence and newly surfaced statements suggesting that the dog in question, Ranger, has acted with alarming autonomy in high-pressure environments. Malik didn't flinch, but Reyes stiffened. Linth clicked a remote, bringing up a slide from the Kandahar report. The line about Ranger biting a fellow soldier, then quickly added another document. This one, a statement from a civilian contractor at JFK who claimed to have seen Ranger fixating on random employees during routine patrols. The argument, Linth continued, is not that Mr. Johnson is unpatriotic or malicious. The question is, did he condition a military animal to react in ways that exceed federal safety guidelines? And if so, did he fail to de-escalate when he had the chance? The room went quiet. Then Malik stood. "I'm not here to defend my training," he said, voice low but steady. "I'm here to defend the truth." He looked directly at the panel. "This dog has more field experience than anyone in this room. He saved lives because he followed scent pattern behavior, things humans overlook. The only time he ever bit a human was when that person was smuggling contraband in a combat zone. He doesn't fixate. He doesn't guess. He acts on what's real." Linth smirked. And we're to believe a dog is immune to handler bias. Malik didn't answer. Someone else did. From the back of the gallery, a voice rose. If Ranger reacted, it's because someone gave him a damn good reason. The room turned. A tall man stepped forward, clean-shaven, his posture unmistakably military. He wore a simple gray suit and a silver pin bearing the insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment. I'm Staff Sergeant Alan Reed, U.S. Army, retired, he said, approaching the witness stand. I served with Malik and Ranger in Afghanistan. I watched that dog sniff out explosives we didn't even know were possible. I watched him alert before an ambush. And yeah, I was there when he bit that logistics tech. Saved our lives. Found gear that was supposed to be under lock. If that dog responds to someone, you better start asking questions not about him, but about who he's barking at. The panel allowed Reed to testify. His statement was clear, detailed, unwavering. He described Ranger's discipline, his restraint under pressure, the protocols followed during training, and how Malik never once used commands that weren't by the book. He never used Ranger to intimidate. Not once, Reed said. He used him to protect. And if this country can't tell the difference, then maybe the dog deserves to lead the investigation. Some chuckles broke the tension, but the panelists remained stone-faced, processing. Linth stood again, clearly unsettled. No disrespect to the sergeant, he said, but field anecdotes cannot outweigh current protocol violations. This is about federal process, not battlefield instincts. Reyes finally spoke. Protocol isn't the issue. Integrity is. And so far, only one being in this entire case has acted without compromise. She looked at Ranger. The room did too, and Ranger, still calm, still watchful, held their gaze without a sound. Following the emotionally charged testimony of Staff Sergeant Reed, the panel called for a brief recess, but behind closed doors, the pressure didn't ease. DHS had ordered a full evaluation of Ranger, not just to verify behavior, but to close the door on any possibility that his alerts were coincidental or manipulable. By that afternoon, Malik and Ranger were transported to a federal K9 assessment facility in Maryland, one of only 4 in the country equipped to analyze combat-trained dogs outside active military settings. The evaluation lasted 6 hours. 3 behaviorists observed Ranger's reactions to controlled stimuli, fake threats, non-threatening strangers, varying vocal tones, altered scents. He was exposed to simulated panic scenarios, staged arguments, sudden aggressive movements from actors posing as handlers, and mock stress signals. In every test, Ranger remained calm unless prompted by a direct physical approach to Malik in a threatening posture, at which point his reaction was immediate but not violent. A forward step, stiff posture, eyes locked. No growling, no bite. By the end of the day, Dr. Evelyn Hart, a behaviorist with 20 years of experience studying canine military responses, gave a recorded statement. This dog, she said plainly, has extraordinary restraint. He does not respond to authority figures' race, volume, or chaos. He responds only when a very specific threshold is crossed, the perceived physical danger to his bonded human. That is not random. That is not manipulation. That is protective instinct shaped by trauma trust and conditioning. He cannot fake that. No handler, including Mr. Johnson, could force this dog to behave the way he does unless there were actual environmental cues triggering him. She continued, her voice more certain. In my professional opinion, this dog has never falsely alerted, and the behavior shown at JFK was consistent with immediate context-based threat detection. While this unfolded, another investigation gained momentum, one that would soon overlap with the emotional testimony and behavioral analysis with cold, irrefutable science. Back at a federal forensics lab in Quantico, specialists had been analyzing trace samples collected from the black nylon bag found in the TSA screening room. Initial surface swabs confirmed the presence of heroin as previously reported, but a further analysis revealed a more complex composition trace, cocaine compact crystal residue, and microplastic fibers used in packaging operations. What stood out, however, was the purity. Lab results showed the cocaine residue held a chemical signature consistent with a particular refinement method used by a cartel-connected smuggling ring currently under surveillance by ICE and the DEA. That ring, known internally as Canopy Drift, had been evading tracking for over a year by using legitimate logistics workers as mules, often airport contractors, TSA staff, or off-duty transport agents who could bypass full inspection through badge access. And now, suddenly, a bag with matching trace signatures had appeared inside a secure TSA screening room with no proper log, no seizure tag, and a planted location mere minutes before a decorated veteran with a narcotics-trained dog was brought in for questioning. The lab's official statement, filed as part of a report to the Inspector General's office, was clear. The narcotics detected within and on the external nylon fibers of the bag are consistent in composition and packaging with the Canopy Drift distribution batch seized in Houston 2 months prior. Purity level 87%. Chemical stabilizer matches. Fiber blend identical. That sentence, when presented to the DHS panel the following day, landed like a hammer. It was no longer about intent, no longer about possible bias. It was now a matter of obstruction and conspiracy. Malik sat silently as Agent Reyes read the results aloud in the tribunal room. The room was packed, press lined the far wall, quiet but watchful, and 2 federal attorneys had been seated in the rear, sent by the DOJ to observe. Ranger lay beside Malik's feet, breathing steady. When Reyes finished reading, the retired military judge on the panel leaned forward. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "has anyone from any agency ever suggested to you that you may have been intentionally targeted for the purpose of discrediting your military K9? Malik looked at him, voice low. "Not directly, but the pieces fit." The judge nodded slowly. "And if the narcotics match an ongoing trafficking operation, and the placement occurred inside a secure facility, then the only logical conclusion is that someone inside this structure wanted your dog to fail in front of a camera." Malik didn't reply. He didn't have to. Ranger sat up slightly, gaze locked forward. And in that moment, something shifted in the room, not in noise, not in motion, but in certainty. It was no longer Malik who was on trial. It was the system. The final hearing lasted less than 20 minutes, but its outcome echoed across the country for months to come. Seated, once again in the same tribunal room, Malik wore a simple navy suit and a crisp white shirt. No insignia, no medals, just quiet dignity. Ranger sat beside him, his coat recently groomed, the scar above his paw barely visible under the soft fur, his posture regal, attentive. A federal clerk stood and read the findings of the panel, her voice steady, deliberate. "It is the conclusion of this committee," she began, "that Mr. Malik Johnson was subject to unlawful profiling and procedural abuse during his security screening at JFK International Airport. All allegations made against his conduct and the behavior of his service animal have been thoroughly investigated and dismissed. Furthermore, the actions of the TSA officer in question are now the subject of a criminal investigation under federal jurisdiction." As the room remained hushed, she continued, "In light of these findings, and in recognition of Mr. Johnson's distinguished service to the United States military and his continued commitment to integrity and public safety, this committee formally recommends his full exoneration with public apology to be issued by the Transportation Security Administration within 7 business days." Malik didn't move. He just nodded once, then placed his hand gently on Ranger's neck, a silent exchange between partners that didn't need words. The apology came swiftly. TSA Administrator Gina Walker held a televised press conference where she stood at a podium bearing the agency seal flanked by senior staff. "Today, we acknowledge the failure of our system," she began. "Not only in the handling of a decorated veteran and his K9 partner, but in the deeper systemic shortcomings that allowed this incident to unfold under the guise of standard procedure. Mr. Johnson was not just wronged, he was nearly criminalized for the very vigilance we claim to honor. For that, we are profoundly sorry." Behind the scenes, sweeping reforms were already underway. Internal memos became training modules. TSA officers across all major U.S. airports began mandatory sensitivity and bias awareness retraining with new policies specifically addressing interactions with veterans, military working dogs, and service animals. Language in the manuals was rewritten. Behavioral flagging protocols were revised to include third-party review for every secondary screening involving prior service members. More importantly, the agency reinstated its defunct Veteran Engagement Board, this time placing Malik as a special advisor. His first task, designing guidelines for K9 handler interactions during screenings and establishing a hotline for real-time reporting of misconduct both by travelers and TSA personnel. And then came the ceremony. It took place not in Washington but in a sunlit hangar at Andrews Air Force Base surrounded by folding chairs, flag formations, and rows of soldiers in dress uniform. Ranger was led out first, walking confidently beside a junior handler, his harness polished, his eyes alert. Malik followed wearing his campaign ribbon and unit pin on a formal blazer, no need for pomp, just presence. The citation read aloud was short but powerful. For unshakable loyalty, instinct under fire, and a lifetime of service beyond duty, we honor K9 Ranger with the Distinguished K9 Service Medal. Applause broke slow at first, then louder, echoing against the metal walls. Ranger didn't react to the noise. He simply turned his head slightly to look at Malik, who bent down and whispered something only he could hear. Photos from the ceremony later circulated online. One in particular went viral. Malik crouched beside Ranger, hand on his collar, the metal glinting in the light, the American flag rippling in the background. The caption read, "He never left his post, even when we failed him." In the weeks that followed, Malik's story was told across media, some outlets focused on the injustice, others on the partnership, most on the quiet strength of a man and his dog who refused to yield. But Malik never framed it as victory. Accountability isn't revenge, he told a veterans panel at a town hall. It's responsibility, and it's long overdue. He declined book deals, refused politics. He just kept showing up to base briefings, airport meetings, university seminars. And Ranger was with him, always beside him, always watching. Because while the system had nearly failed, the bond between them never had. And that more than any ruling or medal was what the country now saw. Not just a man cleared. Not just a dog vindicated. But a team tested, trusted, and finally truly honored. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we bring to life. What part of Malik and Ranger's journey hit you the hardest? And by the way, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, we'd love to know.